The Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to St. John. When Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping and the Judeans who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He asked, where have you laid him? And they said to him, Lord, come and see. Jesus began to weep. So the Judeans said, see how he loved him. But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was laying against it. Jesus said, take away the stone. But Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, Lord, already there is a stench because he has been dead 4 days. Jesus said to her, did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? So they took away the stone, and Jesus looked upward and said, Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me. When he had said this, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth and his face wrapped in the cloth. And Jesus said to them, unbind him and let him go. The gospel of the Lord. A couple of weeks ago, maybe a month ago now, we were having problems with our oven at home. A couple of times it just wouldn't heat up. We were trying to make chicken nuggets for Patrick and his favorite meal, chicken nuggets, french fries, and ketchup. And I was trying to, and the oven just wouldn't heat up, but it didn't happen all the time. It just happened sporadically. And here and there we would smell gas, which of course is worrying, but it never lasted very long. And so finally we called a repair person, and they came out and they changed the flow regulator valve, I think it was, and voila, everything is fine. But the problem really came after that, because it was inconvenient what was happening before. But after it was fixed, I found that it didn't work the same way it had worked before. Right? Because, your house, you'll have a recipe and it says to cook your cookies at 375 for 20 minutes, but that really they're going to be ready in 17 minutes. Or, it says 350, but really I should put it on 360, right? All ovens kind of do this. And let me just tell you, this is true. I calculated that since I was 16, I have moved 26 times. 26 times. That doesn't even include the couple of moves I made before that. But since I was 16, more or less on my own, I've moved 26 times. Now, a lot of those were in the Navy. So I didn't really have cooking apparatus in my dwelling space. But I would say I've probably had 15 or 18 ovens, and none of them work the same way. Right? I have been making, those Pillsbury cinnamon rolls with the icing? I've been making them my whole life. And you know what? I have never cooked them for 13 minutes at 375 or whatever it says. It's always something different. You can't follow the instructions on those things. And that's true probably with your ovens, right? They have a way that that they work. And if you get a new one, or you fix the old one, or you move, you've got to kind of relearn how they work, right? You've got to kind of adapt what you've been doing to fit that stove. And I've been thinking about this because I have my great-grandmother's cookbook. In fact, it's sitting right there. And it's great. It's like a school notebook that's been repurposed for recipes. Right? Now my great-grandmother was born 130 years ago. She got married about 1910. It's actually a funny story. When we were cleaning out my grandmother's house, we came across a picture, and it's a picture I've seen 1,000 times. It's my great-grandmother's wedding picture. It's in some sort of generic wedding, picture studio, and she's got the dress and got some flowers. There's a handsome man next to her in a suit. They look young and happy. But I'm looking closer at the picture, and it's just off. There's something wrong. And so I take the copy from my grandmother's house, and I go to my mother's house where the other picture hangs on the wall, and I'm looking at it, and I'm like, same studio, same dress, same flowers, same husband. different bride. Same dress, same flowers, same studio, same husband, different bride. Turns out my great-grandmother and her sister, Ida, who I also knew, married twins. And they used the same dress. And apparently, in the little town where they lived, they had not very creative florists or photographers because they had the same flowers in the same studio. And the brothers must have also shared a suit because they looked exactly the same. Anyway, back to my grandmother's cookbook. So I've got this wonderful notebook that my grandmother repurposed, and she wrote down all her recipes. And I didn't really, by the time I knew her, she was quite elderly. Although as old as she was, doesn't seem as old to me now as it did then. She didn't do really a whole lot of cooking when I knew her. But everyone I know knows who knew her before said that she was a wonderful cook. You know, she just like whip things up. But she had this wonderful recipe book, and it's all written in pencil, and it's grease spattered, and there's spots everywhere. I've looked through the recipe book. There is a lot of lard involved in some of these recipes. They lived in the country, in the 1800s. But I also, as I go through this, I recognize many of the things that like we would eat at Thanksgiving and Christmas, right? That these dishes were handed down and through our family. But my great-grandmother, she lived in a farmhouse, at the turn of the century, and she didn't have like electricity or running water or gas stoves. And so the cooking directions say things like, get the oven real hot, or a cool oven after the evening is almost over. So there has all these like weird temperature directions because, I assume it's different if you put in a hickory log or an oak log, or, if it's fresh, or I don't know. I've never cooked in a wood stove before. But clearly there were some challenges involved, much more than the ones I have with my oven. And now my grandmother, this is the best thing, my grandmother has gone through this cookbook and tried to add modern directions, to replace ingredients they really couldn't get anymore, or they could source, from some other place, and to put in temperature directions. And I love this cookbook because although I never got to cook with my great-grandmother, I could see sort of the continuity between her and me, right? We eat some of the same dishes that she would have made, and my grandmother's had her hand in it, and my mother remembers it, and I learned to cook, from them. And so it's wonderful to sort of have that connection. But the best thing about it is all the recipes, they have names, and the names are always like Mrs. So-and-so's macaroni, Mrs. So-and-so's drop cookies, Mrs. So-and-so's, never a Mr. So-and-so, by the way, it's always Mrs. So-and-so, but Mrs. So-and-so something or other. And so my great-grandmother collected and shared these recipes with this whole community of which she was a part, and in which we get to still participate through making some of these same dishes. And man, if that ain't a metaphor for what All Saints is all about, right? This Triduum that we went through actually last weekend of All Hallows Eve and All Saints Day and the All Souls Day, that the church works just like my great-grandmother's cookbook. That we take these stories and these experiences and we gather them from a whole community and we make them a part of our own lives, and then we share them with our family and with others, and they kind of get passed down, right? And I know that this church has like, well, that's just what we do, or Mrs. So-and-so made that, or Mr. So-and-so here. And we have these sort of this shared community of stories. And that's how the church works. That's how Jesus worked in his own time, right? He traveled around and he taught people things, and he did things like this amazing resuscitation of Lazarus, who'd been dead 4 days and was already a little smelly. Like there's a great book. It's sort of a fictional account of Jesus's life. It's called Lamb. It's very funny. And anyway, one of the running jokes is that Lazarus is still like a little off. He's never quite gotten over that. Anyway. The church and Jesus, he tells these stories, and these people have these experiences of him, and they go and they share and they tell those stories to others who want to participate in this amazing community. And just like the recipes, the things that Jesus does that people had these experiences with, we also get to still do. Now, most of us probably will never get to resuscitate someone from dead, but that does happen, right? I mean, if you're a nurse or something, or a doctor, you might get to do that, or a lifeguard. But all of us get to participate in loving each other and caring for one another and reaching out to someone in need and being there and being present, not necessarily healing, but loving. And we experience that, and it changes us, and we share it with others. And so they finally, just like my great-grandmother, they made a whole book of these stories, the Bible that we still share. Actually, my great-grandfather, the twin, that's his Bible on top of her cookbook. It also is completely worn out. It's clearly was like red till it fell apart. And that's what we celebrate here at All Saints. It's not necessarily just those people like St. Luke who did something amazing or remarkable, or all the other ones that churches are named after, or that we have special days for. Because those people are really, really important. And the church probably wouldn't be the church if it weren't for their devotion, for their sacrifices in so many cases. At the same time, the Jesus movement would not be the church without all the rest of us. A church that's made up only of the holiest of saints is not going to make much difference in the world. But a church made up of just regular people coming together, being vulnerable with one another, sharing their stories, taking comfort from one another, sharing with one another, being a community together. Why? That makes all the difference in the world. All the difference in the world. Because without each other, we lose something of ourselves. And that none of us are wholly autonomous. None of us are wholly self-sufficient. All of us need others. And how wonderful that we gather together in the community that not only recognizes that, but celebrates it. And even better that we're a community that's gathered around this most important principle, that the motivating power of all creation is love. And that if we want to be a part of the amazing creative power of the universe and of God, then we too should embody love. Amen.